You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to my 2020 NBA offseason recap here on the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and as promised, I'm going to go team by team, breaking down all the big moves that were made in the NBA from Friday onwards. I'm going to start with the Atlanta Hawks, go to the Boston Celtics, then the Brooklyn Nets, etc., etc., etc. Tomorrow is going to be a big football preview with some miscellaneous sports news sprinkled in. Thursday is obviously Turkey Day. So I'm not going to waste any time. I've been looking forward to this for a while. The Atlanta Hawks made a couple big moves. They signed Danilo Gallinari and Bogdan Bogdanovic. Now, Bogdanovic was a restricted free agent. The Kings can match that contract, but given everything that happened previously, I don't think they're going to. They tried to work out a sign and trade with the Bucks. That fell through. If you keep him around, you're going to have an upset player. Bogdanovic knows you don't want him. You made your bed, Sacramento Kings. Now, sleep in it. Also, you get the sense that Buddy Hield isn't the happiest camper in the world. But one thing at a time. You take a look at this Hawks rotation. Young and Rajon Rondo, who they also signed, Bogdanovic and Herter, Gallinari and Reddish, Collins and Hunter, and Capella and Okongwu. That's a solid 10-man rotation. That's a rotation that's young, has a ton of upside, has some veterans that can still play. Rondo played a big role on the Lakers last year. Gallinari, I think, fits in perfectly with the Hawks. There's a strong possibility that the Hawks can fight for the 8th seed in the East. As we all know, the Eastern Conference is garbage. This is a rotation with 10 quality players in it. It wouldn't surprise me if the Hawks fought for that final playoff spot. That wouldn't surprise me at all. Moving on now to the Boston Celtics. They saw Gordon Hayward get paid by the Hornets. I'll get into that contract when I get to Charlotte. And they pivoted by signing Tristan Thompson and Jeff Teague. Hayward leaving really doesn't hurt the Celtics that much. He wasn't even their third best player. Marcus Smart can easily replace that production. Certainly not offensively, but defensively, he'll more than compensate. The thing that should scare you if you're a Celtics fan is They didn't get any better. This is a net neutral. Can things change? Anything's possible. But they're no better than they were a week ago. And as you'll see, the Eastern Conference got a lot better. You get the sense that the Celtics' window to win is rapidly closing. If they're going to win, they've got to do it fast. Teague and Thompson are fine moves, but how much are they going to really move the needle? I don't see the Celtics as a huge threat in the Eastern Conference. They'll make the playoffs. They may win a round. But they're not a real threat to go to the finals. Not even close. I agree with what Nick intimated on our mock draft 100%. That brings us to my beloved Brooklyn Nets. The James Harden trade still hasn't happened. And the latest rumblings are it may not happen at all. Again, anything can happen, but as it stands right now, it's tending towards James Harden opening up the season as a Houston Rocket. The Nets didn't do much in free agency. They brought back Joe Harris on a mammoth contract. A contract that he's not worth. 4 years at $75 million. That's just under $19 million a year. He's not worth that. All Joe Harris is a shooter. Now, he's a great shooter, but he shouldn't be getting just under $19 million a year. Having said that, though, if the Nets weren't going to give that to him, another team may have given him a similar contract. So, the Nets had to bring Harris back. Sean Marks really wanted to bring Harris back. C'est la vie. But you take a look at the Nets rotation now. Kyrie Irving and Spencer Dinwiddie. Karis LeVert and Landry Shamet. Joe Harris and Taurean Prince. Kevin Durant and Jeff Green. And DeAndre Jordan and Jared Allen. The Green signing was a solid signing. It makes sense. They did need a backup 4. I didn't mention Jeff Green as being a guy who they could get, but it works. Green will be fine. He's a streaky player, but when he's on, he's on. The thing is, though, this isn't a rotation that wows you. Obviously, Durant and Kyrie. I get that. But after them, it falls off a 50-foot high cliff. I've said before that the Nets need a third star. Most Nets fans agree with that. Karis LeVert, as good as he is, how much can you really count on him being that third banana? There are better third options in the NBA. This is a Nets team that's going to contend. It can go to the finals. In fact, it can win the finals. But if you added James Harden, I don't want to say it would guarantee it, because there are no guarantees in sports, but it would make it a lot more likely. And I'll say this. If you're gonna trade for Harden, do it sooner rather than later. We've got less than a month to go until the NBA season tips off. That's not a lot of time to integrate Harden into your system. And you definitely don't want this as a cloud over the Nets once the season starts. If James Harden is still a Rocket come Christmas, you've got to stop the negotiations right then and there. Alright, I remember the 10-11 season where the specter of a Carmelo Anthony trade hovered over the Nets. That team was terrible. Now, they didn't have a great roster. But I'll tell you, there were more Nets fans that were interested in Carmelo Anthony than they were the guys who actually wore Nets jerseys. Even after that, Dwight Howard, will he be traded or will he stay in Orlando? That hung over the Nets for a long time. Brook Lopez was a fantastic soldier. You don't want that cloud hovering over the Nets. The team will suffer. If James Harden isn't a Net by Christmas or even New Year's, then you've got to leak something to a guy like Woj or Shams, someone like that, and say the Nets are no longer interested in pursuing a James Harden trade. You don't want that hovering over the Nets for the whole season. There's no way that ends well. That brings us to the Charlotte Hornets. When Gordon Hayward opted out, a lot of people thought he was nuts. They didn't think he'd get anywhere near a $34 million contract. Well, give Hayward and his agent credit because they secured a 4-year, $120 million contract with the Hornets. Is this an overpay? The answer is yes. There's no way that Hayward puts up similar numbers to the numbers that he put up when he was with the Jazz. He was a guy who averaged over 19 points per game in 3 straight seasons. He's had a ton of injuries since then. Since the start of the 17-18 season, he's only played in 125 regular season games. That's just over a season and a half. The idea that Hayward's going to go back to Jazz form is ridiculous. But Hayward is a scorer. And the Hornets need a scorer. Devontae Graham can't do it all himself. LaMelo Ball definitely isn't a scorer yet. You've got Terry Rozier as your bench scorer. Who are you relying on to get you buckets in your starting lineup? It can't be P.J. Washington. It can't be Cody Zeller. It can't be Miles Bridges. It can be Hayward. With Gordon Hayward on the Hornets, it wouldn't surprise me if he averaged 18.5 points per game. He fills a huge need for the Hornets. Yes, it's a little bit more than you'd like to give him, but think about it. Who else are the Hornets going to spend that money on? They have to overpay for guys. There's a reason that they had to overpay for Terry Rozier last free agency. It's because no one wants to go to Charlotte. They're not going to have a shot at Giannis next year. They're not going to have a shot at a guy like Durant or Kyrie or James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Russell Westbrook, if those guys hit free agency, Luka. No way. You have to overpay for guys. Hayward fills a need. The Hornets weren't terrible last year. They finished as the 9 seed. Now that's not great, but it's not abysmal. Hayward fills a big need for the Hornets. Does it move the needle enough to get them into the playoffs? Possibly. But their front court does scare me. Washington and Bridges are fine players, but Zeller and Biyombo, you can do a lot better than them. I'll skip over the Bulls since they didn't do anything. They had Garrett Temple. Alright, he'll give him a nice veteran presence. I wasn't overly impressed with Temple last year with the Nets. He can guard multiple positions, but that's about it. He's a nice guy, class act, professional, good locker room guy. But he hasn't moved the needle a lot for the Bulls from a basketball perspective. The Cavaliers are kind of interesting. They signed Damian Dotson, who never really got a fair shake with the Knicks. Whenever you watched him play, you saw some glimpses of potential, but he never got a lengthy chance to strut his stuff. It's possible he can get that with the Cavs. And I'll be interested to see what he does with that opportunity. The Cavs also replaced Tristan Thompson with JaVale McGee. Is that a downgrade? The answer is yes. But McGee and Thompson have similar games. They'll lose something in production, but in terms of the role that the Cavs expect their backup center to play, they won't lose too much there. The Cavs didn't give up a lot to get McGee. They didn't get much better this offseason, to tell you the truth. I don't see a path to the playoffs for them. I'll skip over the Mavericks. They are content to run it back with the same roster. That's all well and good. I don't mind that. They just need Porzingis to stay healthy. That brings us now to the Denver Nuggets. They were the 4th best team in the NBA last year. They made the Western Conference Finals, and I'll take the Celtics over them. You'd expect them to try to get a lot better. Or at the very least, keep the roster they have. They didn't do that. Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee are now Pistons. They brought back Paul Millsap, who's way past his prime. There were some Nets fans that wanted Millsap. I'm glad they didn't get him. JaMychal Green will be a solid get. I like Green a lot. He'll probably play the Plumlee role this year. But the Nuggets just didn't get any better. In fact, they got worse. You're trusting Michael Porter a lot. You're trusting Millsap a lot. You're trusting Bol a lot. I don't like what the Nuggets did this offseason. They didn't get any better. They really needed to. I think they're going to take a big step back this year. Speaking of the Pistons, they did what the Knicks did last year. They just loaded up on big men. Their roster doesn't make any sense to me. I'm trying to conceive of a way that they get 25-30 wins. I don't see it. You're trusting Blake Griffin a lot. You're trusting Derrick Rose a lot. Small forward's a big black hole for him. Their frontcourt rotation is Jahlil Okafor, Mason Plumlee, Blake Griffin, Jeremy Grant, Seiko Doumbouya, Isaiah Stewart, and Sabin Lee. You've got too many mouths to feed. There's no way this season ends well for the Pistons. They are going to be a dreadful team. The Eastern Conference is kind of weird. The top teams got better, but the lesser teams got worse. So if you're a lesser team and you just got a little bit better, yeah, there's a pathway for you to sneak into the playoffs. But the big teams, like the Nets, the Sixers, the Bucks, they just got a lot better. I'll skip over the Warriors, they didn't do anything, and I'll move over to the Houston Rockets. Like I said, James Harden is still there, Russell Westbrook is still there. But in addition to that, the Rockets did add a couple talented players. Christian Wood is a really good player. Doesn't get a lot of love since he was with the Pistons, but no, he can ball. Averaged 13 points per game last year, just under 6.5 rebounds, good defender, shoots the ball really efficiently. That was a great get for the Rockets. The Pistons added every big man imaginable, yet they let the one really talented big man they have leave. I'm sorry, Pistons fans. The Rockets also added DeMarcus Cousins. And I'll tell you, if Boogie can stay healthy, that's a fantastic signing. What did the Rockets need in the playoffs? A true low-post threat. They got bullied by Steven Adams. They got bullied by Anthony Davis. They got bullied by Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee and all those guys. Assuming he can stay healthy, he's exactly what the Rockets need. If the Rockets are truly content to open up the season with Westbrook and Harden on the roster, they've got a real chance to surprise some people. This is a roster that makes sense. Westbrook, Harden, Gordon, Wood, and Cousins is a really good crunch time lineup. The bench needs some work, there's no question. But in terms of their starting five, and or their crunch time lineup, you've got something there. I'll skip over the Pacers. They didn't do much of anything. They brought Justin Holiday back. Really good shooter. They signed him to a very reasonable contract. 3 years at just over $6 million a year. Fantastic move. The Pacers are content to run it back, and I think it can work for them. That brings us to the LA Clippers. And you've got to give them credit. For a team that massively underachieved, they didn't need to blow everything up. They just needed to retool. Like, everyone was going nuts that Montrezl Harrell went to the Lakers, and I'll get into that in a minute. But the Clippers brought in Serge Ibaka. JaMychal Green left for the Nuggets. Okay, you brought back Marcus Morris and Patrick Patterson. You also swung a trade for Daniel Otoro in the draft, a guy who I really liked coming out of Minnesota. The best way to describe him would be a better Jamal Magliore. They replaced Landry Shamet with Luke Kennard. They're very similar players. The Clippers will be fine. They didn't need to blow everything up. They just needed to retool their roster. And they did it. Let's see how it works for them. I think it can work out really well for them. I really, really do. That brings us now to the reigning and defending NBA champions, the LA Lakers. Anthony Davis is taking his sweet time to put pen to paper. All well and good, whatever he wants to do, the Lakers have to do. You'd like him to sign long term if you're a Lakers fan, but you really don't have much say over it. The Lakers rounded out their roster kind of interestingly. Out with Rajon Rondo, Avery Bradley, and Dwight Howard. And in with Montrezl Harrell, Marc Gasol, and Wesley Matthews. That's a net positive. I'll say this. I think their roster entering this coming season is better than their roster was last season. They added Schroeder, they added Harrell, they got rid of Rondo, and they got rid of Howard. They brought back KCP, they added some shooting in Wesley Matthews, they still have Kyle Kuzma. Anthony Davis and Montrezl Harrell defending the interior should be insane. No one's getting past them. The knock on the Lakers entering last season was they had LeBron, they had AD, and they had Kuzma. Who was behind them? Well, they won the NBA title, and now they've added Dennis Schroeder and Montrezl Harrell. You gotta love what the Lakers did this offseason. Moving on now to the Memphis Grizzlies, a team that had an incredibly weird offseason. They're gonna run it back, which is all well and good, but they overpaid for a lot of their free agents. On what planet is DeAnthony Melton worth just over $8.5 million a year? I understand he's good defensively, but 4 years is ridiculous for him. John Conchar, in limited time, showed that he can shoot, but on what planet do you give him 4 years? Jonte Porter, a guy with injury concerns, you give him 3 years. What's going on in Memphis? I understand the logic in running it back. Your young guns are just going to get better. Ja Morant, Dillon Brooks, Jaren Jackson, Brandon Clark. But you had an opportunity to get a lot better. And you overpaid 3 players. I mean, they're solid players. There's a role for them in the league, but that's if everything goes right for them. And no one's going to be mistaking them for Giannis anytime soon. This was a weird offseason for the Grizzlies. I didn't like what they did. I'll skip over the Heat. They didn't do much of anything. Some people made a big deal out of them losing Jay Crowder and Derrick Jones Jr., but they brought in Avery Bradley. They brought in Mo Harkless. Is it a net negative in terms of talent? The answer is yes. But they still have a roster that can contend. Dragic and Nunn, Robinson and Hero, Butler and Iguodala, Adebayo and Achua, and Leonard and Olynyk. I think the Heat will be fine. I didn't mind what they did in free agency. They had a cluttered roster anyway. In fact, it's still cluttered. They just needed to add some quality depth, and they did. They'll still be a force to be reckoned with, no question about that. That brings us to the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm not going to talk about the Jrue Holiday trade. I talked about that last week. Bringing in DJ Augustine was a really good move for the Bucks. He is a really good backup point guard in this league. Put up 10.5 points per game, 2 rebounds, 4.5 assists, solid defensively. He's a good backup point guard, quality player. Bobby Portis is a quality backup frontcourt player. He can play the 4, he can play the 5. He had a solid season for the Knicks. He wasn't Willis Reed or anything, but he was solid. Torrey Craig is a good wing defender. Yes, they lost Robin Lopez. Yes, they lost Wesley Matthews. But everyone that I just mentioned is gonna fill that void. The Bucks did get better this offseason. Would they have been better with Bogdanovich? Absolutely. But they did a solid job in pivoting. They added 3 quality bench pieces. They have a solid 9-man rotation. Holiday, Augustine, DiVincenzo, Connaughton, Middleton, Craig, Giannis, Lopez, and Portis. That's a hell of a lot better than their 9-man rotation last year. The Timberwolves did a solid job in bringing back their young guns. Malik Beasley and Juan Hernan Gomez got very reasonable contracts. If Joe Harris gets under $19 million a year, Malik Beasley has to get $15 million a year. I think that's very fair. I like Hernan Gomez. He can stretch the floor. And Ed Davis should give the Timberwolves a really good backup center. Tough guy, good rebounder, good defender. It's nice to see him and D'Angelo Russell together again. That brings us to the New Orleans Pelicans. You can make the argument that no team improved more this offseason than the Pelicans. Obviously, they traded for Bledsoe. I talked about that already. But to add Steven Adams and to pair him with Zion Williamson, that's a scary front court. You're not out-rebounding the Pelicans. You're just not. Yes, they lost Derek Favors, but you still have Nicolo Melli. You brought in Willie Hernan Gomez. You still have Jackson Hayes. You're fine. The Pelicans are fine. All they have to do is bring back Brandon Ingram, which shouldn't be much trouble since he's an RFA. And you're set. I firmly believe that the New Orleans Pelicans are going to make the playoffs next year. That brings us to the New York Knicks. And I want to attack this from 2 different ends. What their fans thought they were going to do, and what they actually did. Their fans thought they were going to get Fred VanVleet. They thought they were going to get Gordon Hayward. In fact, there was a small contingent that thought they were going to get Anthony Davis. That was the small minority, though. Most people thought Hayward and VanVleet. And even then, more people thought Hayward than Van Vliet. Instead, the Knicks don't get any superstars. So it's another year of them not getting a franchise-altering player in free agency. Now, there were reports that came out that said that the Knicks knew early on they weren't going to get Van Vliet. He wanted to stay with the Raptors. That's a bad look for the Knicks. If that's true, that's a bad look for the Knicks. You want to stay in Toronto, where you have to pay double taxes, versus going to Madison Square Garden. I really thought the Knicks could get Van Vliet. The fact that they didn't, that's a bad look. Hayward, they didn't want to give him that contract. I don't mind that. That was a big contract. It makes some sense for the Hornets. For the Knicks, it doesn't make any sense. Would it make them better? Short term, yes. Long term, no. Anthony Davis, there was no way he was going to go to the Knicks. That was a ridiculous premise that some people had. But you take a look at what they actually did. They added solid players. Austin Rivers is a solid player. Alec Burks is a solid player. Nerlens Noel is a solid player. They're guys who can be flipped for second rounders. Leon Rose traded for Ed Davis and then traded away Ed Davis and got 3 second rounders, Omari Spellman and Jacob Evans. That's really good. The Knicks are going to struggle this year, no question. But they actually have a GM who's being patient. It doesn't seem like they're going to trade for Russell Westbrook. They just signed Rivers. They brought back Peyton. Unless you're going to trade RJ Barrett, I don't see where Westbrook plays. And even then, I don't think any GM in their right mind would trade Barrett for Westbrook. And Leon Rose seems to have an idea of what he wants to do. The Knicks' rotation is cluttered a little bit. It's going to need to be fleshed out a little bit, but it doesn't matter. The Knicks aren't doing anything anyway. If you take all the expectations out of the equation and look at it in a bubble, the Knicks had a solid offseason. Keep it going. Don't go crazy in preparation of next year. I'll skip over a few teams. The Thunder, we all know what they did. They got 1 million picks. They're set up fantastically for the future. They just have to hit on the picks. Do I think they will? Yes, but ultimately, time will tell. They're going to be bad in the interim. The Magic didn't do much of anything. They lost DJ Augustine, but they brought back Michael Carter-Williams. I don't think they're making the playoffs. The 76ers didn't do much of anything. I talked about them trading for Danny Green and Seth Curry before. Great job by Daryl Morey in getting rid of Al Horford's contract. I said that before. That brings us to the Phoenix Suns. They brought in Jay Crowder. They brought back Dario Saric. They brought back Javon Carter. Their team's going to look weird, but it can work. They're going to have Chris Paul and Javon Carter at the 1. Carter's a really good shooter. No complaints with bringing him back. Shooting guard, Devin Booker, and Langston Galloway. Again, really good shooter. Small forward, Jay Crowder and Mikal Bridges. That's really good. Crowder played a very important role for the Heat last year. Bridges is a solid backup, really good defender. That can work. Power forward, Dario Saric and Cameron Johnson. And center, DeAndre Ayton and Jalen Smith. Is that a guarantee? No, but that's what they should do. That's a solid rotation. You've got a well-rounded team there. You've got a roster that can shoot, they can defend, they can rebound, they can distribute. It wouldn't surprise me if the Suns snuck into the playoffs. They got a lot better this offseason. Adding Paul was huge for them, and adding Crowder was the cherry on top. Great job by the Suns. The Trailblazers didn't do much. They brought back Carmelo Anthony, which was really good. They brought in Derrick Jones Jr., that was good. They brought back Rodney Hood, really good shooter. And they replaced Trevor Ariza with Robert Covington. Huge upgrade. Did the Trailblazers get better? The answer is yes. Do I think they're going to make the playoffs? The answer is no. It wouldn't surprise me if we heard rumors of Lillard and or McCollum trades sooner rather than later. I just don't see a path to a championship with them on the Trailblazers. They got slightly better. Other teams got a lot better. The Kings are screwed. I went over that in talking about Bogdanovich. They're going to have to let him go. They didn't bring anyone in free agency. They made trade Buddy Hield, De'Aaron Fox, and Marvin Bagley. I feel sorry for you. I'll skip over the Spurs. They didn't do much of anything. Their reign of terror is over. And that brings us to the Toronto Raptors. They brought back Van Vliet, like I said. They lost Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol. Those are huge losses. But they did bring in Aaron Baines. They brought back Chris Boucher. The Raptors got worse. There's no question. It was great that they were able to bring back Van Vliet. The richest contract ever given to a player that went undrafted. I just don't like their roster behind Lowry, Van Vliet, and Siakam. It's not terrible, but it's not great. They're not winning an NBA title anytime soon. They'll make the playoffs, but I'd be surprised if they got out of the first round. They just didn't get any better. It's that simple. That brings us to the Utah Jazz. A team that had a really good offseason. They brought Jordan Clarkson back. He was a really important player for him last year. And they brought in Derek Favors. He will be a fantastic backup for him. The Jazz got a lot better. Favors is going to help him out a lot. It wouldn't surprise me if they got 45 wins next season. And they could surprise some teams in the playoffs, I'll tell you that. The last team to talk about is the Washington Wizards. They really don't want to trade John Wall and Bradley Beal. So they're trying to make a legitimate run with them. They brought back Davis Bertans on a massive 5-year deal worth $80 million. That's $16 million a year. Bertans is a fantastic shooter. There were some people that wanted him on the Nets. I would have welcomed him in a heartbeat. And Robin Lopez should be a solid backup center for him. He's good defensively. He can score within 3 feet. Thomas Bryant's going to have to carry most of the load, but I like Bryant. I like him a lot. It wouldn't surprise me if the Wizards snuck into the playoffs, assuming everyone there stays healthy. Like I said, tomorrow's going to be a big football preview along with some miscellaneous sports news sprinkled in. I'm going to start with the sports news and end with the football. Until then, I am Jacob Valk saying, if you're looking for job security, drive a mail truck. Managers always get fired.